Hello everyone, my name is Ben Evans, I'm the Director of London Design Festival. This discussion today is about our major project in Trafalgar Square. But before I talk about any detail, I'd like to introduce the Director of the V&amp Foundation, who've been our co-producers in this wonderful project.
Thank you. I prepared a small speech. So the first thing I want to welcome you here on behalf of Elena Baturina, the founder of V&open, and the whole V&open team. What is V&open? V&open was set up to foster creativity innovations, to promote people and ideas today to build solutions for tomorrow. And here in London, we start a year-long program to research the design of 5 senses, which is leading us closer to the most mysterious, the most interesting sense, the intuition, the 6th sense. And we really believe that intuitive design is a synthesis of technology and sensory. And London, as a capital of the 20th century avant-garde music, has been chosen to host sound. While on the other stopping points of the V&open global roadmap, we shall research other senses, for example, taste in Milan during the Fury Salon in 2013, and other senses in other world capitals of design. We have started our research with V&open sound portal installation, and there are a lot of events, talks, discussions accompanies this installation. And our today's meeting is really also a very important part of the program. And I want to thank ARAP, I want to thank Sound and Music for their great and wonderful work. I want to thank personally Ben Evans and his team for this great, really, and very hard work during the last 6 months for the Sound Portal 2EP on the Trafalgar Square. So thank you to everybody, and let us listen to the real experts in this field of sound.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Now, the first thing I want to ask is, has anyone been to see it yet? I mean, how many people, hands up, who's actually, oh, great. So that's a good start. Those who haven't yet been down to Trafalgar Square, you're in for a great experience, but it's good that we've got some people in the audience who've had that experience already. Let me first of all introduce our panel. On my left is Richard Whitelaw from Sound and Music. Sound and Music are the organisation who have commissioned the 5 artists, and that's been their kind of contribution to the project. On my immediate left is Stephen Phillips from ARAP. ARAP have contributed in 2 ways to this project. 1 with the expertise of their acoustic team, and 2 with Stephen's design. And Stephen has kind of almost single-handedly ensured that the project is there and stands. On my right, we have 2 of the sound artists. My immediate right is Joe Thomas, whose piece is playing today. Mm-hmm. So as soon as we finish, we can all pile down to Trafalgar Square and listen to Joe's work. And on the right, we have Nathaniel Mann, whose piece was playing yesterday, and I hope some of you had a chance to hear that. Let me just contextualise why we're in Trafalgar Square. As I think you know, London Design Festival is a kind of pan-London experience, and there's 250 projects across more than, 250 venues in the city. The square is the gift of the Mayor's office. And, sometimes I think us Londoners are a little bit blasé about it because it's another public place in the city. But for the rest of the world, it is the centre of London. You know, when the cameras go now to London, it goes to Trafalgar Square. So the kind of symbolism of doing something there is actually terribly important. Another reason about being in Trafalgar Square is, and these are Mayor's office figures, 1 million people a week pass by, which is a hell of a passer-by audience. And our task, in a way, is to try and get some of those people to pause and have a look and take part in what we've built for them. We have a history of projects there. Some of you will remember the piece that we did 2 years ago, which involved 8 robotic arms from an Audi car assembly line, which we managed to get to talk to each other. And they wrote with a kind of laser lighting, a calligraphy. And it meant that you could send it a message, and it might be, hello, mum, or whatever you wanted to say, And your mum would then receive a short film of these things writing, "Hello, Mum, love Ben," and it was design, and it's illustrative of trying to find ways to explore the kind of boundaries of design and interpret it in new ways. Before that, we did a project with Jaime Hayon, a Spanish designer who was living in London at the time. And he built us a kind of giant chess set, which he handmade and hand-painted. And his inspiration was the Battle of Trafalgar, which apparently in military history was a very strategic battle. And why not then reflect that strategy through a kind of giant game of chess? And we played real games with grandmasters. We've taken on all comers. And Trafalgar Square works when you create something for people to participate in and do. And that's, I think, really what this project is about this year. And yesterday, Nathaniel, there were queues all day, yes?
That's right. It was incredible.
So there's a little bit of the kind of context of it. It's a very important site for us. It's arguably our most important project within the festival this year. But what we want to do today is explore some of the contributions, how this project came together, and to just talk a little bit about the whole idea of sound design and art. Stephen, can I start with you? Because we've worked together over the longest period of time and had a lot of debate and discussion about the design and how we dealt with designing a physical structure which wasn't what the design that we wanted to experience, because we're trying to celebrate design that you can't see. But let's talk about the physical design to start with.
Yeah, so basically Ben came and saw us at Arup, and I remember the initial meeting, he said, all I know is I want to do a piece about sound, and the location is Trafalgar Square. And that was the brief. So it's very, very open. And, we were talking about maybe doing posts, a series of posts, or, but actually it was all about sound and listening. So just because Trafalgar Square, it's a chaotic place, there's so much going on. It's kind of the worst place you could actually have a sound piece, but the best place at the same time, because there's such a captive audience there. So the first thing we had to do was get a concept together, and we kind of felt, well, we haven't developed ambisonic sound, but it's something that's out there, and it's not really been maybe exploited too much. And
we should talk about what ambisonic sound is. Perhaps we'll come on to that in a minute. But
so we went, let's do a piece, and we just came up with an envelope that would mask off a lot of the background noise. And we talked about the experience we wanted as you go into the space, somewhere where you can listen, really, really listen. And that was really the starting point, wasn't it? And
I think it's worth adding that, to try and put the emphasis on the oral rather than the visual, we talked about non-design.
Yeah.
So we talked about, it's not a named, celebrated designer behind this structure. And we've deliberately chosen materials. It's a rather alien, I don't know what everyone thought about it, but, it's clad in matte black rubber. And I hope that when you come around the corner and interact with, my God, what's that? And I hope also you're kind of drawn to it. But it was a deliberate kind of non-design statement.
It was. It was matte black rubber, just so that it's anonymous, so that you don't know what's inside, and so that it's a little bit intimidating as well. So we wanted that a little bit about it. And you've got no idea that it's got this space inside that's perfectly attuned, virtually perfectly attuned, to listening to sound. So you don't know what's inside, and then you've got this lovely space in the middle. And then we kind of force people to sit on the outside, not looking at each other, so they can close their eyes and just listen. That was the idea.
And here we go with some pictures of a design. I didn't realise we had any, actually.
No, we just got them emailed over. So.
Right.
Yeah.
But, the other thing that's worth mentioning is that one of the references to us is a film, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Now, I hope some of you have seen that film, but you remember there's a scene right at the beginning when one of the monkeys picks up a bone and then whacks the other monkey over the head with a bone. Well, in the background is this big black obelisk, and no one really explains to you what this is. And this is the first scene in the movie, and the next time you see it, it's the last scene in the movie, and it's a kind of metaphor for future, past, past, present. The other great scene, I think, in that film is when the main guy in the film, he arrives at the kind of space station hotel, and there's this wonderful kind of interior of a kind of a sloping white floor and those famous red Oliver Morgue chairs. Am I talking to myself? Does anyone know
I know it well, yeah.
Well, marvellous. And, I think we get a bit of that in this structure because it's transformative when you go into the centre.
And the lovely thing is, it works very well because it does force people to listen to the sound. And it's funny, going there at night, it reinforces that because you can't really see the structure, you can't really see what's inside either. And all you know is there's a bench in the middle, you can lay back, contemplate, close your eyes and just listen. And in that respect, I think it just works pretty well.
That's our chairman, by the way, in contemplative mode. Perhaps we could go, Nathaniel, to yesterday. We were just before we started, we talked about, what was the phrase you used? Deep listening.
Deep listening.
Yeah, tell us about the experience yesterday of how the visitors interacted with your piece.
So when Stephen's talking about the listeners laying back and creating a space for listening, that was obviously the ideal behind the design, and the ideal and the reality are often far apart. But what was really surprising yesterday was that's actually what was happening. To create a space for that clearly was for listening. I mean, people entered and seeing the behaviour of the other people, they instantly sat down and started listening. And to create a space where people felt safe to lie down in Trafalgar Square, the kind of most public, with so much movement space in London. It's a safe and dedicated listening space. That's something very special. And
but we've still got the context. I mean, I like the way you can look out through the roof and see Nelson standing there.
Sure. And something about the light changing as well. That's very special.
Tell us about the way that, I mean, you talked about some of the different visitors, you know, the American tourists and the French visitor, you know, and so on.
So the flow of people coming in and out of the square, obviously, there's people from every walk of life, every background and every reason walking through there. I spoke to somebody from the Marines who was on he'd been to a visit in the office, and he was on his lunch break. He spent 20 minutes in there listening, and he was very impressed, and it led to a long conversation about songs in the Navy and the Marines. I met a group of 50-year-old ladies from Minnesota who stumbled across it there here just for a holiday, and they listened to the whole piece, which is 30 minutes long, which is for me is kind of.
And you've been invited to Minnesota.
That's correct. Yeah, on no other grounds than to just go and visit them because they enjoyed the piece. And a young French guy who's 18 years old, and he's in London for 4 days, and he spent an hour and a half listening in the space. It's quite special.
So this idea of a kind of the environment that Stephen's created, and the relationship with your work and your piece, could you articulate that a little bit for us?
I think the interesting thing to consider, especially in terms of design, is that previously, when we think of sound design, I mean, I think production in music, for example, is sound design, and it's overlooked as design. But we think of sound design, and we think of the audio-visual relationship. We think of sound design within film. But here, what Stephen's created is a space just for sound design, removed from the audio-visual relationship, where it stands and is independent on its own. And that's something that people haven't really experienced before.
It's worth mentioning that another film reference, I'm afraid, Apocalypse Now, and I'm sure almost everyone has seen that movie. But there's the guy who did the sound on that was called Walter Murch. And I went and saw a lecture he gave once, many, many years ago. And he was widely credited as the world's first sound designer. And the reason is that his relationship with the movie was very different from what normally happens, where the film is shot and then it's given to the composer to add a score at the end. In this case, he was there when the film was being made, and actually participate in these scenes. I mean, and arguably certain scenes in the movie, the music's the most important point. And so that was another kind of starting point on this. But while we've had these ambitions at the festival to do this, we didn't know where to go. So we went to Richard. Tell us about what you're doing and how you found these two.
Well, a combination of factors, really. I mean, as you know, we've been talking about the project for a little while, but until V&amp came onto the scene, there was a considerable hole in the budget. So we'd had a little bit of time to think about who some of these artists might be if this sort of dream project were to happen. The challenge that we were set, really, at Sound and Music was to find 5 distinct artists who could create, world international standard pieces that would be distinct and really, really strong, but also could work with the technology. Now, there's a lot of artists, as you know, working in electronic music. There's some who work in multi-channel, discrete multi-channel. But with ambisonic, though it's a technology that's been around maybe since the late 70s, is that right? There's not a body of work, and there's few pieces, and artists who have worked with it, who are of an international sort of standing, you could probably count on the fingers of half a hand, maybe, to be honest with you. So we started in this room. So we started with Jana Winderen, who I knew through her work on the Touch label. Fantastic, really interesting artist whose work is on Sunday, because I knew that she'd been involved in ambisonic as well. And then Nathan as well, who I'd come into contact with quite recently prior to the Sound Portal actually getting the go-ahead. I knew that Nathan had this background in ambisonic as well. But then the challenge was to find other artists who were really skilled in working in multi-channel and could reach the technical standard and rise to the challenge of making the work. We gave the artists a completely open brief in what they wanted to create, hoping that our curation was skillful enough that they would all create something different and distinct, which they have all done, which is fantastic. So it was a real challenge for the artists to rise to meet the technology. But also then the collaboration, which has been very important throughout this project, particularly between the Arab Sound Lab and Ned Crow, who works there, and the artists themselves, in terms of them being able to learn how to think ambisonically if they hadn't really done that before. Maybe we should talk a bit about ambisonic.
Yeah, let's talk about what it is now, shall we?
It's not a question, but that's not something that's best for me. So I'm going to hand back to Stephen to talk about that.
Stephen, sorry. I'll tell you a bit about ambisonics, and actually it's not something I knew a little bit about before this project, but obviously you have to learn very quickly what it is. You can read about it on Wikipedia, you can learn all about ambisonics, but it's basically an array of speakers, a spherical array of speakers that allows you to be immersed in sound. Each speaker has an individual channel. Stop me if I'm saying the wrong thing, Nathan, because I think this is right. You've got an individual channel which is connected to an amplifier, and you can modulate the sounds individually through each speaker, and you can record ambisonically by using a special field microphone, and that picks up the direction of the sound or the position of the sound in different locations. So it's really an array of, a Sound Portal, it's an array of 9 speakers in the walls, and then you've got 2 subwoofers in the bench.
Joe, sorry, can I just go to Joe first? Okay. When we were speaking about it last week, I think, you talked about ambisonic having an almost a kind of physical quality to it, as if you could have a kind of downward pressure experience or sound, or almost sound brushing past you, or something. Do you want to talk about that?
Because you're working with ambisonics, you're working with 4 channels. Most of the time you record in 4 channels with a sound field mic. And the channels are called X, Y, W, Z. W is height, so you work with height and you work with depth and you work with breadth as well. Which is slightly different from stereo, because you're working in stereo, you're working with a discrete stereo image, but ambisonics it's different because you're working with height, and it's just in with my work, and when I was working with the sound portal, I was really aware of that from the start, and I wanted to really focus on cutting spaces in half and really exploring the just the physical aspect of the sonification of the space. It was really incredible. I really recommend that everyone goes out and tries it. It's really amazing recording with Soundfield mic, though. What you have got to do is you've got to transform the material into something called B format. And B format is when it actually records the acoustic properties of the space, so the original acoustic properties. And once those get recorded into B format, then you have an ambisonic single signal, isn't it? So it's really special work to work with, and it just offers a completely different dimension to sound, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Nathaniel, did you encounter difficulties with working with this system, or was it just a great opportunity for you?
As Richard mentioned, it's something that I've worked with before, and for me, it's just an expanse of creative opportunities. As Joe has explained, we're dealing with height, but we're also dealing with immersion. So the Soundfield microphone that I used to create, we both used to create our pieces. If you put it in the center of a room and you have one sound source, it will record the acoustic response and the reverberation from all angles, and that's what's reproduced in the ambisonic playback system. So you can do panning by walking around the microphone, and that's reproduced in the space. So in terms of creatively, I mean, for me, it's also a way of escaping digital post-production. So for example, if I want to pan something around the space, for example, I put sounds in a speaker and spun the speaker around the microphone rather than digitally panning it in a post-production software. So it's quite, for me, that creative element is very exciting.
It's really, I mean, it's a completely different. I had to think about unlearning. I really wanted to think about the process of unlearning when I was working on this piece. So unlearning what I had learnt before, because I was learning a new craft. I think it was really beautiful to work with. Excellent.
One of the things that we all had to treat was in the basement of Arup's building in London. They have a kind of sound lab, I think you call it, and you're treated to these kind of ambisonic experiences that they've created, and it is absolutely fantastic. And for me, and I hope it was your experience too, it's probably the best sound experience I've ever heard. And how near or far are we from these kind of systems becoming much more kind of widespread? I mean, because lots of people have surround sound at home, the cinema systems have improved, concert halls have improved. Where does it go next?
Well, I think that people generally want to live with good sound, so they, I mean, I was designing sound for cars last year. Yeah. So I was designing acoustic spaces for the inside of cars. So I don't know. Sound can be used for just a phenomenal amount of things, and people want to live with good sound, really. I mean, what do you think, Richard?
I'm not so sure about that. I mean, most people's homes I go to who have 5.1 set up, it's awful, really. I'd rather they take it down. The speakers sort of piled on top of each other. It's either plugged in wrong. Even stereo, even in my home, the stereo's set up pretty badly, I'll be completely honest with you. But then you make do in your life. And this is the point of a presentation like this, is to go beyond, your regular humdrum sort of listening home experience, to create something which is really a step beyond that, to help you imagine, okay, well, this is almost a vision of what it can be like, what listening can be like. And there's never an ideal space, and there's always context to it. But I think this is quite an important point. As regards the future of listening, well, I'm unsure about that. I'm more interested in what we can learn from the past, and in terms of the visions that people have had a long time ago about what the future of sound might be. I think this is informative, because recording hasn't been around for very long at all. But people have been writing about their experience of listening for a long time. So think about Francois Rabelais, for example, who was writing about sound in the 16th century. There's a wonderful section in Gargantua and Pantagruel where the main characters are on a boat, and I don't know if you know this, they're sailing through fog, and these objects start to fall onto the ship, and they melt. And as they melt, sounds are released. And he records that there was a battle here, and at some point the sounds themselves were frozen. So he's thinking about recording, thinking about sound as something physical, and sound recording and playback, in the 16th century. So where are the people who are thinking about the vision of sound for the future now? I mean, beyond technology, I think poetically we need to imagine the futures of how we can listen, how we can experience sound, beyond just the constraints of technology. If we're always thinking within this frame of the technology that we have now, we're never going to be able to make the sort of paradigm shifts that a writer like Rabelais was able to do at that point. So for me, I'm really interested in just the literature around sound, the way that people have described sound as it appears in painting or in poetry, or even just writing down documents about their sound experiences, because I do sense that there's a bit of a shift in sound, even in architecture, from this idea of an objective, let's say acoustics, towards more of a sound studies, which is very much a subjective approach to sound. And this is something where artists have a really important role to play, I think, and why the Sound Portal is such a really vital project, because it allows us to dream about what might be the future of sound in a really poetic way, rather than a sort of quite objective, dry way. Animates the technology in a really interesting way, I think.
I mean, just continuing on that, because I think all of that is absolutely, but just thinking back about the way that most people do experience sound, and I think you are absolutely right. I mean, even though systems have become better and more sophisticated, they're probably not installed terribly well. And most people's experience is through their iPod. And, compressed sound is awful.
Well,
and stream sound.
We're not really talking about sound mediated through technology. I'm more thinking about listening, because everyone has a really high fidelity of experience of sound all the time, and that's your ears. Not just the technology it's mediated through. We're all listening all the time. And the more we can get to that transparent process of just listening, if there's any aim to the work at all, it's to encourage people to listen better, not to be necessarily engaged with technology in more ways, for people to actually come out of these experiences and think, actually, I could listen to the world. Here we are in the centenary of John Cage's birth, aren't we? It's exactly the point that he made, which is so profound, through the really simple gestures like 4 minutes 33, is you can actually listen to things. You can create your own music through just listening to the world. And if we learn to become better listeners, that's the vision of the future of sound for me. Not necessarily something that's tied up with technology. It's tied up with the poetics and a really understanding of how we interact sensorily with the world. And as you were talking, I think it's really interesting to hear a Russian person talking about synesthesia, which is such a strong theme in Russian aesthetics, quite clearly. So here we are thinking about, okay, how do we actually draw information from the world? How do we become better in tune with our environment? And listening is such a vital, important part of this. And projects like this can really highlight that. Another thing that I think is worth mentioning is that we've talked a lot about the technology, but less about the content of the pieces themselves, which is also completely different. So I think that it might be our idea to hear a couple of examples of the work, bearing in mind that this isn't the ambisonic experience, this is actually stereo. Because there's two things going on here. There's quite a new way of presentation, but there's a total general audience that goes through Trafalgar Square, which makes it so interesting, as you quite rightly said. And even just describing these things as music and getting into this frame of reference that this is a musical way of listening to concrete sound, in a way, is quite a sort of paradigm shift, I guess, for a general audience.
But we've consciously not described it as music, haven't we? Or have we? I mean, I thought we always you talked about it as sound, and that was quite distinctive as a way.
Yes, to an extent, but how do you... This could be a whole nother conversation, couldn't it? Where do you find the...
I think what's happening at the Sound Portal and what you're describing is more about people and emotions. Yeah. Sorry. I think the Sound the sound portal is an interesting laboratory because it's what we're getting is a reaction from people, and it's an emotional reaction. So you will find that particular sounds, and this would be an interesting kind of study or interesting to understand, is what is people's reactions to a grating sound, and what are people's reactions to a very deep rumble? And you know, because there'll be emotional reaction there, and they'll probably build up pictures in their mind of maybe a place they were at when they experienced this sound. And I think this is the bit of research. This is kind of the future of sound, is possibly the link between sound and people's emotions, and what's their reaction to particular sounds, and how can they inform people's lives and their spaces in a city, for instance. Can they be replayed? I don't know.
Connecting to what Richard was talking about, I'd say about 50% of the people who came out of the sound portal yesterday also started talking about the sound of Trafalgar Square, and and the sound of the city, and instantly became more aware, which is exactly what you were talking about the inducing a state of deep listening that then extends beyond the sound portal and is taken out into the square, where you start to be more sonically aware, because it's quite easy to rush through the city and not be listening to anything. And this relates to something that we were speaking about a few weeks ago, where you were envisaging in the future what the city would sound like. And I think that's what leads on from what you're about to say.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't know. I mean, it just opens up a whole realm of possibilities. You know, I can imagine the kind of sounds I like. Now, if I wanted to feel calm, I'd love to experience, you know, because I live out in the country. Sorry, I'm not a Londoner, but I like to experience the rustle of trees. You know, I like to hear trees in the wind. I like the sound of running water, but then I also like to be. I like really frantic sounds sometimes, and if I wanna kind of get up and really get inspired, I'll listen to something else. And you guys all.
It was me thinking you were a dedicated urbanist.
Do you not think that you like the surprise? Some people like the surprise of sound as well. And walking into a space or walking into spaces and not knowing what's going to happen, and that is kind of quite attractive, and taking that away or trying to take that away sometimes. Maybe sound is one of the things that we've got kind of left that isn't so controlled. Yeah.
And this project has the gift of surprise, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because you know, we all know what this installation's about, but almost all of our visitors will arrive and, oh my God, what's this? And go in and have a surprise. So instead of, it's almost like we're kind of titillating you in this order. Should we listen to one of these extracts now?
Yes.
Nathaniel, should we start with yours?
Okay. Yes, if we can.
I think they're quite short.
This is not the actual experience you have. It's just a stereo rendition, quite a simple stereo rendition of the piece itself.
Yeah, it's just 2 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes about. beautiful. I mean, that was pretty powerful in stereo.
So shall I talk about...
Would you like to just talk a bit about it?
So obviously, as Richard said, it's not just about ambisonics. It's also a commission for me, which is an opportunity to respond, to create a new work, which responded to the context of Trafalgar Square, which is obviously very interesting, a powerful context, as you were mentioning earlier, a symbol of the city and the focal point of the city in some senses. So for me, I used it as an opportunity to explore ideas of identity and heritage, both in terms of kind of national identity and on a very personal level. And exploring issues of kind of acoustic ecology, which is kind of the history of the sounds and lost sounds that help define a time or a culture, and ideas of song and music and where culture is carried. So I created a collage almost of these different sounds and references, each one for me having a specific was representing a specific part of these arguments or these thoughts. So in order to produce this, I took the sound-filled microphone, which is the ambisonic 360-degree microphone, and I've travelled all over the country. I've been on steam trains, that's what you heard there, a church organ in Suffolk. I recorded in Trafalgar Square with a folk singer from London called Sam Lee. You heard the voices there of Shadows in the Shade, which are shanty singers from Suffolk. There's birds from an aviary in North London. So, I mean, you would have heard, for example, the birds fluttering overhead and moving around yesterday in the sound portal. The rain falling from above. There's crickets jumping around from different sides, and all of these things adding to this network of references and resonances.
Thank you. Should we hear your extract now, Joe?
Yeah.
So 2 minutes of Joe's work. Joe, do you want to just talk a little bit about what we were listening to there?
Yeah, the piece is called Amber, and you heard the start, the beginning, and you heard about a minute of the central section. I was trying to write a warm, sort of embedded piece. I was thinking about like otherworldly, fossilized sort of beings. I really wanted to write something warm and sort of, I wanted to do something I'd never done before, actually. And it doesn't sound.
Can I offer an opinion on your piece?
Yeah.
No, something just occurs to me now. You were just saying that you felt you had to unlearn some of the things that you learned before about working in stereo. And just listening to it now, and the way you focused on a single sound source, and the way it's almost like an etude, it really reminds me of early musique concrète.
Really?
Pierre Schaeffer and Pierre Henry, when they first invented this, musique concrète, working with recorded sound. You have all these pieces like variations for door and a sigh, and things like that, where they're using very limited, restricted sound sources, just so they can think, okay, well, I've stepped into a new space here. I have to kind of restrict what I'm doing and focus on it, so I can actually develop some sort of grammar for working. So,
Excellent.
Just occurs to me just now. So you're connected to the great tradition of French musique concrète, which I knew already. So there you go.
I wanted to create like a sort of hot space, a really warm sort of hotbed of sort of glitch and noise that people could sit down and sort of contemplate, or not contemplate, but just experience. And when I was working on it, I had to, I thought really carefully about the form, the way that the piece was actually structured, because to create spaces you have to kind of uncreate them as well. You have to build them, and deconstruct them in sound, and or construct and deconstruct, and that's kind of what I was doing, but very, very slowly over time. And I was working with very limited pitch to noise ratios. I'm like sounding a bit. Stop me if I'm going too musical. But I could only sort of to really build the spaces up. I wanted to really be focused in what I was actually using. So I limited myself quite a lot. You're right, actually, Richard. And I thought really carefully about the way that sound was moving through the space. So you'd get like shimmers of resonance just passing you sometimes, and then not at all. Something that really hit me when I was researching ambisonics, when I started writing the piece, is Michael Gerson, the person that was sort of a pioneer, a founder. He used to work for the BBC, didn't he? He was very, very involved in ambisonics, in the early days of ambisonics, and he was really involved, or he was really interested in live improvisation. So I thought I would set the piece free and go down that route and try and keep it sort of free, actually, and slightly more instrumental than my other pieces, because normally I really transform materials, so it's incredibly technological or vocal, and I kind of stay to the sound source of the cymbal. That's about it.
I'm mindful of the time, but I think we here sitting would be really interested to have some opinions from you, particularly those people who've already visited the sound portal, Would anyone like to ask a question or to offer some perspective or opinion? Oh, I've got a few. Have we got a roving mic anywhere?
Hey, I have to admit that I came in here sort of negatively because last night I went with my girlfriend and we're sort of faced before going out in the evening with a very long line before going in there, and we ended up turning away, and now I say that regretfully, and I'll definitely go back tonight. But sort of, what were the restrictions in size for this that kept it? Yesterday the limit was 25 people. And we asked the woman sort of, what do you think the wait could be? And she said, well, it's a 30-minute piece. People are free to go. You could be here for 20 minutes. You could be here for 10. You could be here for an hour. And yeah, just sort of how are your feelings about that as a restriction and sort of, I guess, I mean, I say pushing away. It was my choice. I wasn't forced out. But yeah, how did you work?
Yeah, in order to create an ambisonic space, our sound lab that we set up at Arup is a tiny box. It's actually only 3 meters by 3 meters. So I was just talking to Nathan just now about the size of the sound portal, and to be honest, it's a slight compromise because we've had to make it a little bit bigger than that in order to fit enough people in to experience the sound. So, you know, Richard was saying earlier, you know, I think ambisonic sound, it's a special experience, but you have to go in. We couldn't really make it any bigger because the effect is lost. So really you should have, you know, roughly maybe a 4 meter by 4 meter box. The space at Sound Portal is, I think it's about 6.5 meters across, so it's 6.5 meters, it's much bigger. But you still get the good effect, you get the sweet spot of sound in the middle. So, yeah, I'm really sorry that you had to wait, but unfortunately it would be a compromise if we made it much bigger so more people could go in. I think also we wanted quite an intimate space as well in the centre, because it takes you away from London and Trafalgar Square. So, and it completely changes, you know, how you feel because it's an intimate space. So, but I encourage you to go back because Joe's piece is playing today, and it will sound totally different in there.
Yeah, come down. Well, come down.
Okay, next question.
Thank you. I'm going down to Trafalgar Square this evening. Just very quickly, one conceptual question, one practical question. Conceptually, I want to pick up your theme, Joe, about unlearning and deconstruction.
Yeah.
What would happen if we were to design something that manipulates the speed of sound? I don't know what it does technically.
The speed of sound?
Yeah, I think it's 330 meters per second, is that right? Is it possible to manipulate that so that we actually experience something totally different that we are used to? So that's conceptual. I don't know the answer to that. And the practical thing is the Paralympics have really raised my awareness on all sorts of disability issues. Would it be possible to design a sound installation so that the auditorily impaired people could also experience it? Maybe not in the way we do.
I think there are installations in the world now going around for people with auditory disability or impairment. I'm kind of aware of those. I'm not quite sure that I understand your question about the speed of sound. But I was working on a project last year called Crystal, where I was working with sounds from the inside of a partial accelerator, which is a large synchrotron. I was working with the sound of light, which was quite fascinating and amazing. Were you kind of asking me?
No, it's just something I thought about. We hear sound because sound travels at a particular speed.
Oh, right.
And what if artificially or through your intervention?
Oh, I see. Oh,
what if the sound travels at much higher speed or much lower speed?
I get you now.
And how will we hear it differently?
So I've tried. I was talking to this. I was talking about this question to a lady from the New Scientist a few weeks ago. I'm not aware that we can, but I'm sure that I'll have to. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Again, I'm dying to say something about this because it comes back to my theme as well. We often think about, oh, good. So how can we do this with technology? How can we manipulate the speed of sound? Start play sound underwater. It's at a different speed. It travels differently through materials. Bruce Nauman has created installations using reflection. You walk through simply, and there's no sound. The piece is silent, but you sense different auditory spaces, different pressure on your ears because of the way you walk through this maze of things. And also, auditory impaired people, I think I'm right here. There's very few people who can actually hear no sound at all. So, and everyone hears differently. But sound is not just something you hear with your ears. Let's be clear about that. Sound is something you experience with your entire body. And there's many elements of Joe's piece today that you will actually feel through your ass, so to speak, as well as in your ears. So, and I've done some work with hearing impaired students as well, and also hearing impaired students who suffer from multiple learning difficulties, including autism and things like that. And to enable students through technology to an extent to control sound, particularly low frequency sound, and be able to then master some sort of almost gestural, instrumental approach. And this is really interesting and actually really rewarding. So all that stuff is going on, but again, you don't need the technology. You can just use water or bricks or paper or everything that's around you to slow and reflect sound in different ways, and actually change the way that it sounds, filter it. A lot of these electronic processes just mirror actual processes which take place naturally, acoustically anyway.
The Drake Music Project do a lot of work with auditory impaired people, so yeah, good.
Okay, next question. Oh, we've got a lot more. Great. In the centre here. Can you pass it back, Mike? Thank you.
Hi. I saw Joe's piece just before I came here. I've literally come straight from there to here. I thought it was brilliant.
Wow. Thank you.
It had a very relaxing effect on me. Like everyone seemed to come out of there and feel like they've done like 5 years worth of yoga or something like that. Would it ever become more of a more permanent thing? Like, would there be the opportunity to design something like that, where there's places in London for people who like live and work here to go on lunch break and sit there and have that opportunity to relax and then go out and have all the hectic.
Let me comment on it. I mean, we've talked about the pros of doing things in Trafalgar Square. The cons are you don't get much time there. And you get basically one weekend with the week running up to it and beyond, because weekends are basically booked out for the whole of the year. Now, the great thing about working with the Be Open Foundation is they're very committed for this project to have a legacy, and they're exploring various ideas at the moment. It will stay in the UK, for this year. So I think there will be at least one, and I hope 2, 3, or even 4 opportunities over the course of the next year to experience the sound portal again. Minimum of 3. Well, so watch this space, I think, and I hope in those other locations that there will be an opportunity to experience the sound portal for longer than 5 days, and that's been the only constraint for us about using the square.
Hello. I found it really, really good. I'm a design student, and I've been used to working with visuals with music, and I've always thought that they accompanied each other, and it could actually, the visuals help the sound. But after going to your piece, I was completely changed, and I thought, do you think that visuals help sound, or do they?
I think there are lots of ways of listening and lots of ways of viewing, and everyone's different. So some people experience vision when they listen to sound, and they don't need to have visuals put in front of them. Visuals can be stunning when you're performing sound, and they can be enhancing and embracing and add another dimension to the experience. So I'm not actually going to. I'm not going to sign visualization off in any way, because I think it's a I think it's valid and important, but I think the actual the process of listening, like I was doing this morning with my friend in the sound porthole, was just like incredible. You know, just listening and just imagining. It's just an amazing process, and everyone should have the experience, or just the opportunity to experience that without any images. They should have the opportunity to just experience independently their own imaginations, you know, a blank canvas. And it's great that this has happened. Yeah.
We got one more question up there at the back, and I think we probably should make that the last one.
Hi. Yeah, we are talking about being sonically aware. So I have one question. Like, normally there are so many ambient sounds around us, and sometimes we become unaware of them. Let's say the air conditioning here. It's present, but we are not aware of it. But as soon as it turns off, we become aware of it. So how does this filtering happen? So in a way, we are aware of the air conditioning. We are aware of the sound here. But we notice it only when it turns off. So how do we process this? I mean, how do we filter out the sound, like these kind of sounds which we don't want to pay attention to? Does this happen in the brain, or?
Can I offer a very untechnical, unsophisticated response to that, which is my kid said to me, "Dad, you're going deaf." And I actually taught myself not to hear them, which I hadn't quite realised. And I was perfectly able to sit there and read a paper with mayhem going on around me. However, I did actually go and have a hearing test, because I thought, oh, maybe they're right. You know, maybe I do suffer from tinnitus, so I have a bit of kind of ringing in my ears. Anyway, nothing really wrong with my hearing. And I had a very, very interesting chat with a consultant who said, you know, you assume that your hearing is physiological, but there's a very strong psychological component to hearing. And it's, you know, the obvious kind of story metaphor is that if you live next to a railway station, you don't hear the trains go by. But I think in our daily lives, we're selective in our hearing, and we make decisions about what we want to hear and what we don't want to hear. And I think much of it is very subconscious. And I find that absolutely fascinating, actually, you know, and how one balances that in one's own lives.
But I would say that it's actually a cognitive process that extends across all the senses. There's a researcher at Queen Mary's University, Pat Healy, who looks into this, and he talks about you're not aware of your pockets until there's a hole in them. You're not aware of your keys until they stop working. If you try and... Were you aware when you brushed your teeth this morning? You know, if you think back now, you can remember it, but the actual process of it, perhaps it's an automatic thing. So these things are happening across all layers of our experience all the time.
Yeah. I mean, just to say that there has been research into why your mind actually chooses to block out certain responses and emotions, and you could probably read Sigmund Freud and learn a lot on that. It's like you have your superego, and it blocks out certain things that you don't want to know. So if you have the noise of air conditioning in the background, it's because your superego is really trying to block it out, to mask it out, so you don't want to hear it. I think that's quite interesting. What's nice about the sound portal, though, is you're very unaware of all the background noise when you enter the space. And you only become aware of it when you actually come out the exit corridor, and suddenly you realise you're back in London, in Trafalgar Square, and you really notice the sounds of the fountains next to you and the traffic and people. So it's something you've got to experience to understand it.
So I think we're all saying, if you haven't been, get down there. You've only got 2.5 days to go to experience this. I know some people are going every day, so there's an opportunity to hear all of the different 5 commissions that we've done. Talking of the senses, I think, brings me back to the Be Open Foundation, because they are going to be doing a series of projects and work over the course of the next year or so, focusing around senses. So I would keep an eye on what they're doing, because I think there's going to be some very interesting stuff coming out of the Be Open Foundation, and they're very easy to find on the website. For us, this has been an absolutely fascinating project. For me personally, I've had an interest in it when I've known very little about it, and I've learned a lot more about it. For our visitors, I think it's another wonderful experience, which is about design. However, if you want to read it in another way, that's perfectly valid too. I hope you'll also get out there. The festival continues until Sunday. There's projects across London. The guidebook's here, and thank you for coming.